play this or I could sing. I recommend you listen to this.
I'd like to hear you sing.
So I'd like to call the, well, I'll give you a minute to sit down and stop chatting. It's lovely to hear all the enthusiasm for this upcoming meeting. So I want to begin by acknowledging that we are privileged to be on the traditional territory of the Coast Salish people. And I would like to have a motion for the approval of the agenda, please. Moved and seconded. Do you need to know who? Any opposed? Thank you very much. And now we have public input period. Is that gentleman at the back considered public? Right. No delegations, Mr. Barry? No correspondence? Any information? Okay, we'll begin with reports. R1, report from the Assistant Manager of Finance regarding the 2019 draft budget review, Function 100, which is general government. Welcome, Ms. Solder.
Thank you. The Function 100 general government budget covers a whole lot of functions here at the regional district. It's the regional administrative expenditures for us. Expenditure categories include the board, executive office, legislative services, administrative services, the general manager of corporate services, that's Mark, strategic services, and finance. Regional grants and aid are also included in this function, as well as legal and auditing. So it's quite a catch-all, and there's many different parties involved in creating this budget. So I am definitely not the expert on it, but I put them all together, so I'm the one going to talk to you about it today. So this function is, the costs are primarily funded through requisition, as well as cost recovery by way of the general government allocation. So as Mr. Keeber described earlier, the general government allocation is approximately 4.5% of the 2 years previous budget for all of the other functions. They each pay in 4.5% of their budget to help cover the costs. And that allocation covers about 40% of the total core costs. Overall, the general government requisition is proposed to be increased by 5.14%.
Thank you. Any questions, directors? Director Stone?
So regional grants and aids within this function. How much of that budget, sorry, I'm just flipping around here and I might have lost my way here, but how much of this budget is allocated to regional grants and aid?
So the board has a regional grant and aid policy that sets a maximum limit of $150,000 per year for regional grants and aid. It is included in this budget.
Director Acton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think it was the total increase was 5%, 5.13%. And I know that's kind of the average that we have already straight across the board. But personally, I would like to see it reduced to 2%, referred back to staff and have some kind of, because this is such a large requisition, maybe a recommendation of how we could reduce it some further. That would be something I would like to discuss. Or should I create a motion to that effect? Would somebody support my motion?
Did you want to speak, Director Stone?
No, I can speak to the motion that's on the floor now.
There's.
Or we can just discuss while she's writing.
Director Stone.
I support the concept. So we also, and I just clarity through to staff, within this budget, we have the 150 for regional grants and aid, and we have the 150 on top of that for the strategic investment. So we have 300,000 in this budget that's used to regional allocations. I just want to highlight that opportunity. The other piece that we have here is the $150,000 for the next phase of Couch in 2050. I would say that, again, if we're going to do some reductions, maybe it is appropriate that staff bring back some of those suggestions, but the Couch in 2050 piece, I could see that as something we kind of push out, but again, I'm always hesitant to try and cut things that may only benefit us more in the long term. If we're making some policy decisions around how we spend the hard-earned money of our citizens that gets transferred to us to provide services, I would not want us to be making decisions through this process that would only cost us more money down the road. The impacts of climate change and some of the impacts of what we're looking at Couch in 2050 could cost us in the multi-millions of dollars. So I just want to say at the outset of this sort of discussion that things like the strategic investment and the regional grants and aid are very important, but I don't think as critically important as continuing forward on some of our planning around mitigation and adaptation and preventing climate change, which is some of the context around Couch in 2050. So I hope that the committee and then the board would continue to support that process. Maybe we look at how we move forward on that, maybe in a bit slower of a process, but just something that's on my mind as we go through this budget. It is a big one, and this is probably the biggest opportunity we have to really make a difference for our constituents.
Yes, Ms. Older.
Just for clarity, the Couch in 2050 is a supplemental item, so it is not actually included in that 5.14% increase.
Yeah, just for clarity, I was just reading down further. It says if this supplemental is included, supplemental items, if the three tier one supplemental requests, the increase would be 158,000 or 6.23%. So I was reflecting on that part of the report, and that's what brought to my attention, because in that number 3 item under financial considerations, that does include Couch in 2050, does it not? Because it says those 3 supplemental items.
Couch in 2050 is not a Tier 1 supplemental item. It
Tier
was
2.
ranked Tier 2 by SNT. So no, it's not included
So we
in
got
that
my
number.
pencil's not even sharp enough, I don't think, but thanks.
Anyone else? Well, Director Morrison.
Just perhaps a question through, I think Mr. Keeber's been the caretaker of the regional grant and aid application process. Is that correct, Mr. Keeber? Sort of? No? Well, I'll put my question in whatever staff can. We've been engaged in that for a number of years. It's we've had significant contributions to various organizations. I can understand the sentiment that Director Stone had brought forward, in that we want to keep our the friends we have, and in Director McGonagall's case, no friends, but and not have any new ones. And I'm just a little concerned that we don't be a little bit too radical, in that I believe we started a process. We've advertised. We've had submissions and applications by groups, and so that I think that some caution should be given to the notion of zeroing out a process like that. There may be some groups that maybe are very dependent on that sort of thing. So I'd like the opportunity to at least be able to consider some of what we've already put in play. And if we're going to proceed with the resolution that's on the floor, then I'm hoping that staff look at perhaps phased or partial reductions in that amount, if that's one thing they'll consider. Thank you.
Just to clarify, there is no resolution on the floor yet. It might be coming.
Okay.
Does anyone else have any? Director Stone.
Just for clarity, I wasn't suggesting that we just zero it out. I was just saying that on $300,000, we've advertised, we've put out the call for applications, but I don't know if in the applications it says we allocate $150,000 to this and $150,000 to strategic services. It's just a call. And I'm just saying that maybe in a year like this, even if we reduce that by a third, we might be able to absorb some of the one-time costs for purchasing those software modules, because the Tier 1 supplementals are they $158,000 in themselves, or is that the increase with the supplementals? So it says number 1 under financial considerations, core increase proposed to be 118, and then it says if 3 Tier 1 supplementals are included, it's 158. So is that 40,000 extra essentially? So I'm just saying that there's a way for these one-time costs to possibly be absorbed by being more judicious with the rest of our funding within this general government budget. So like, you know, as an example, and I would suggest from my position that we actually be a bit more aggressive than this, but that those tier one supplementals could be paid by reducing each of those two, the strategic investment and the grants and aid, by $20,000 each, would allow us to absorb those pieces and keep that. Again, I'm just trying to have some creative discussion around how we absorb, you know, what should be, if we approve the supplementals, which I actually agree with because they're going to provide cost savings in the long term. I think that $40,000 investment is very wise, but in times of that we should be exercising some fiscal restraint, prioritizing the items. You know, we may hopefully look for some action on the operating reserves if they are in fact $730,000. And the maybe a small reduction in the grants and aid and or the strategic services or strategic services money.
Thank you. Anyone else? Director Kuhn?
Yeah, I'm looking at the, what is it, page 2, and,
Page 2 of the report?
yeah, of the attachment C.
Okay.
And I'm looking at the regional recreation study for 2018 was 80,000, and for 2019 is 60,000. Is that a total, or has it been reduced to 60,000? I don't quite understand what's going on there, because the study couldn't have been 140,000, could it? I mean, God, I mean, it'd be incredible.
Through the chair, it was $80,000, and $60,000 is the amount not yet spent. That is being paid for from from operating reserves.
So what's the total cost of this study?
If I can just add to that, Madam Chair, through
Yes,
to
please.
Director Kuhn, that the original budget for all of the initiatives around regional recreation was $155,000, going back 2.5 years. At the end of this year, we anticipated $60,000 would be left for the remainder of Phase 4 and the continuation of the Phase 3 regional recreation funding discussions. So $60,000 is left of the original $155,000.
Thank you. Director Kuhn, you have a follow-up? Okay, anyone else?
Isn't there a motion to reduce it to 2% or whatever?
The
Is that-
motion hasn't been moved yet, but I think it might be about to be. Director Acton?
I would amend, nope. I'd just like to move, refer function 100 back to staff for options and implications of a 2% requisition increase in 2019.
Second, anyone want to speak to that? Director McGonigal and then Morrison?
And I think that's important to show what the implications would be of going to 2% from the 5.5, taking out of consideration the supplementals. So just from the core, from where we are at the 5.5 to what the financial implications and procedural implications would be of reducing to 2%. And that would be an important discussion item to come back. And it would show us where moving forward those problems may exist, and then we can make an informed decision. I think we have to look at all options, and this is one way moving forward of looking at that option. Thank you, Madam Chair.
And the banana will be a little riper by then, hopefully. Director Morrison?
And just for clarification, the motion applies to number 1 in function 100, and not the supplementals, and we can consider the supplementals in various innovative ways after the fact. Okay.
Anyone else want to speak to the motion on the floor? Director Salmon?
We just,
And
I
then
know it's in
Stone?
here somewhere, but what's the size of this budget we're talking about here?
1.34.
Last year was 1.34.
The requisition for this budget is 2.4 million.
2.4 million, thank you.
Before we go to the question, I'm sure it will be in the report, but just to clarify, general government is the one that everyone pays into, including the municipalities. And the municipalities, if you add them up, pay a very large portion of this. So I'd just like new directors to kind of understand that. I'm always surprised when you guys want to cut this, but, I mean, maybe that might be some questions you would ask, or maybe the report could indicate that, what everyone's share is. And I know it does talk about it further in here, but it doesn't, to me, it's like, this is a surprising motion, but we'll call the question. Oh, sorry, Director Stone.
So, yeah, reflecting on that, yeah, it's roughly a 50-50 split between if you look at the 100 budget that's online, it's a $2.5 million roughly budget. About 1.2 of that comes from the 1.25, about 50% of it from the municipalities. But that being said, it's also one of the larger budgets that we have, and it is one of the better opportunities we have to make an actual difference in the requisition for everyone at the table. I just want to highlight a couple of pieces that I see, though. If we're talking about, limiting to a 2% increase, there are some pretty serious implications. If you do look at the VATM line, it doesn't take much creativity looking through attachment C, to see what the impact of a 2% hold would be. That being said, I think that it's wise for us to review it. I'm just wondering if staff can keep in mind the concept of some of those things that I mentioned earlier, like grants and aids, strategic funds, and operating reserves as a way to find a direction to that, because I would hate to see things like the procurement software and stuff be those suggestions that are going to, in fact, save us money over the long term. And also some of the pieces around, Couch in 2050 Phase 2 is $150,000, and we're not even discussing that yet within this context. Maybe if we get to 2%, we can discuss that, but that's a big piece in itself. So I know I didn't maybe add any clarity there, but I just hope from staff's position that they are as creative as they can, with keeping in mind trying to keep that smooth trajectory of taxation, not sort of dipping into reserves that deplete us or anything like that. But good policy, but something that might mitigate some of those one-time costs that will come by this year, and then hopefully be saving us money in the long run.
Director Kuhn.
I forgot, what is the strategic investment all about?
Mr. Crothers?
Yeah, Madam Chair, that came about as recommendations from the Regional Grant and Aid Select Committee when they reviewed the terms of reference. Originally, we had a 1% allocation of our general government budget to regional grant and aid. On average, $300,000 a year that we allocated. It was a recommendation of the Select Committee that we allocate half of that, $150,000. The other $150,000 was to be put aside for the board to use for emerging issues that would come up throughout the year that were strategic in nature that the board would want to have an opportunity to invest in.
Thank you, Mr. Crothers. Do you have a follow-up?
Well, I mean, quite frankly, I could see cutting both in half.
So.
I mean,
if
we're
I-
going to face a
if I
squeeze,
may,
let's face it.
Yeah, if I may, I think we have a motion on the floor that is going to give a report that would help us have all the information to make a sensible decision about that. If you're willing to wait until we get that report, Director Kuhn? Because that'll be the time that we can all see the implications. And was
All
that
right.
what you were going to say, Director Morrison?
I was going to ask you to call a question.
Yeah, so I'd like to call the question. We'll get the information and then we can have the discussion. So, all in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Okay, so I'm not clear now what we're going to do with the supplementals. Are we going through them?
No.
Okay. So we move on to R2?
Yeah, we've just moved the 100 over. So now on to R2.
Okay.
The allocation budgets, function 105, it's IT, HR, Municipal Insurance Association, and Geographic Information System.
And will Ms. Solder be talking to us? Thank you so much. Go ahead.
So as Joe Barry mentioned, Mr. Barry, this function does contain information technology, human resources, our liability insurance through the Municipal Insurance Association, and our GIS functions. Cost of these functions.
Can I ask, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Can I ask if directors would listen to Ms. Solder so we're all getting the same information? Thank you.
Costs for this budget are fully recovered through allocations, and so this budget was presented to the board back in June. And at that time, a few changes or a few supplemental items were approved. In addition, we've had a few minor changes. As was discussed in an earlier meeting today, we have a new building at Canada Avenue, and some staff from our HR department do reside over there, so that also had a few cost implications. So there were a few amendments. And so we just wanted to bring it back so that the new board had a chance to look at it, and also just to make you aware of what some of the changes are. So in total, the information technology budget increased by 24,000 or 3.09%. That one was primarily due to salary and benefit increases and an approved supplemental request for land and management software from operating reserves. Additional staff were approved during the June review of the HR budget, and that has resulted in a total increase of almost 290,000 for HR, which is about 42% for their budget. The liability insurance budget was reduced because we've changed the way that we're doing the liability insurance. We're now directly coding it to the departments who have deductibles. And GIS was approved to increase their budget by 39,381, which is 6.58% of their budget. And that was due to changes in staffing costs and allocations related to the cost of the building.
Thank you very much. Director Morrison.
I would move the recommendation, speak to it if there's a seconder.
Seconded. Go ahead.
Thank you. This is it's an allocation budget. It's important for those that weren't here at the time of these discussions in June to note that there were significant pressures that were expressed and shared with the board at that time, and though these numbers are, if they were straight requisition numbers, would shock me to a certain extent. We went into this eyes wide open. There's a demonstrated need for the increases that are being reflected in this report. And I'm not wanting to institutionalize or build in, lock in increases, but these were increases that were definitely needed and demonstrated when the reports were presented earlier, and I'm comfortable with moving forward with this. And also acknowledge that to change an allocation budget like this would have such a dramatic ripple effect downstream to other budgets that we really should move forward with what's been presented. Thank you.
Director Kuhn.
What is that item, safety and wellness advisor? Like, is that a new staff position, or what is that?
Who will speak to that? Thank you.
Through Madam Chair, in the 2017 budget process, I asked for additional funding for a position for a safety and wellness advisor for the organization that would start off as a part-time position and then be partially funded by some of the recovery that comes from having a reduced WCB premium and potentially a discount on those premiums through a core audit through WorkSafe BC. And then that was for the first year, which was this year, 2018, or last year, sorry. And then for 2019, the demonstrated need and the workload of that position suggested that it should be made full-time, so go from a half-time position to a full-time position. And that 1.5 was part of the supplemental request through my allocation budget submission in the spring of this year for 2019. So yes, it changes a part-time position into a full-time position.
And what's the cost for that?
The cost is approximately, I would think about 70,000. No, it has to be a little bit less than that. Sorry. It's a half FTE.
It was approved in June and the person has been hired.
No, the cost of the increase from part-time to
To
full-time.
full-time, that's a good question. The 1.5 is, so yeah, about 60,000, I think, 50, 60,000. The requests went in together as a 1.5 net, and then the separation of them was determined by senior management team later in the year, so it wasn't specified, and so I don't have that number isolated. I apologize. But the total cost of the 1.5, which was the total request of the supplemental, was 136,000. So it's actually slightly less than 50,000 is what I'm thinking, yeah.
Okay, Director Kuhn? So Director Sebring and then McGonigal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just checking, have the savings at the other end of the pipe materialized in terms of reduced WCB premiums, et cetera?
So we have experienced reduced WCB premiums, both from our experience in 2016 and 17. There's a bit of a lag. Both of those are not connected yet to the hire because there's a 3-year lag in when you see your premiums changed based on your experience. So we have benefited from some savings, but they are not directly related to the hire of this new position. So from a funding perspective, the plan around funding the position is coming to fruition, but it's not yet directly attributable to the hire, if that makes any sense.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Director McGonigal?
That was my question as well, whether there was any implications of the audits with WCB, so thank you.
Is there any other questions before I turn again to Director Kuhn, because he's spoken a few times? Director Salmon?
For Talise again, just for perspective, what amount is this budget? What's the total figure, dollar figure?
I left my notes. Oh, the total budget,
2 point.
sorry, let me just flip enough pages here. Oh my goodness. Just about 2.5 million. And it is fully allocated. So all of these functions provide direct services to essentially every other function in the CVRD. So all of the costs are allocated among the departments.
So it's another, it's 6-7% of the requisition again, right? Isn't that group, the big group, the one like general government and like transit? Okay, just for perspective, that's, thank you.
Anyone else? Director Kuhn?
Yeah, 2 questions. One, what does that individual actually do? And the other question is, are we such an unsafe place that we need a person to keep us safe and well? I mean, I don't quite understand it. I mean, so please explain that to me.
So with respect to what this person does for their job, they are responsible for coordinating the administration of a safety system for the CVRD. So up until this point, because of the way the CVRD has grown, each independent division has been responsible for their own safety, and we have had a fairly decent safety record. Organizations are vulnerable to premiums going up from single injuries that last several years. It's very hard for an organization to combat that kind of insurance experience. One of the ways that WorkSafe BC compensates organizations for that difficulty is by allowing them to participate in this CORE program. And the CORE program basically solidifies the administration part of your safety program. So, and if you meet the audit, then you get a discount that's not related to your actual injury experience of the firm. So the process of going through that, creating the system, making it centralized, and making sure we pass all the audit is a highly administrative task. It's not really about injuries on the ground. And this person has been hired to bring us through that process. Additionally, as you heard from Director Morrison, the HR division has been under stress from workload, and one of the pieces that takes up a lot of time is actually injury management for the low number of injuries that we do have, and for accommodation. So when people have injury or illness or disability, whether or not it's job caused or from their personal lives, we have a duty to accommodate them in the workplace, and it's highly labor intensive. And this new hire is taking on that portfolio as well. So they will work with healthcare providers, employees, our managers, to make sure that people who are suffering injury or illness, whether it be temporarily or permanently, are accommodated in the workplace. And that from a human resources perspective, accommodation work is almost the single biggest piece of growth industry in HR, because human rights legislation, the bar is going up and up and up. So our duty to accommodate keeps getting larger and larger and larger, and the workload associated with it requires staffing.
Mr. Carruthers.
Thank you. And I would like to add to what Ms. Mohan had to say. We are a large organization. We have up to 400 staff on our payroll, between part-time, full-time, providing a variety of functions within the regional district, operating heavy equipment, operating our recreation facilities, doing bylaw enforcement, working in confined spaces in our water utilities. I will be honest, it is absurd to think that an organization with 400 employees would not have a dedicated occupational health and safety officer. And I don't sleep well at night as the CAO of this organization, responsible for those 400 staff. And our staff have done an admirable job. Our individual units have done a good job of maintaining a good safety record. Our HR department has done a good job with the resources that they have. That is by luck that we've been fortunate. And the fact that we now have somebody coordinating it ensures that we have high standards maintained. We have somebody to assist with accident investigations, the return to work. It is one of those areas where we have grown as an organization and we have not kept up. I would argue that if you went to comparable organizations with as many staff as we have, you would have more than one occupational health and safety officer in that organization. So this is about protecting the organization. It's about protecting our staff and just being good, responsible managers.
Thank you, Mr. Carruthers. Director Sebring, and then I'd like to call the question, and then Director Wilson.
I just want to echo what our CAO said. I mean, in the context of North Cowichan, I can tell you we had an incident a year and a half ago that involved workplace safety, and the fine that we were hit with was considerably larger than the cost of hiring somebody to this position. So we hired somebody to this position and paid the fine. But hopefully, now that we have somebody in this position, because like this organization, everybody was doing health and safety off the corner of their desk in each of the little, Parks and Rec and all the different departments. And now we have somebody coordinating it. And I think it's expensive, but it's one of the better moves we ever made. So there you
I
go.
believe the fine was something like $130,000.
It was more than that,
Director
but-
Wilson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just going back to what you were saying, this was a part-time position before, and it's going to go to a full-time position. How many hours did they work when they were part-time, and roughly what will they work when they're full-time? Because I'm trying to get some idea of why it's going to cost $60,000 per year extra to go from part-time to full-time. What's the correlation between the number of hours part and full-time?
So I can answer partly, and it looks like Mark wants to answer as well. So the partial answer is that because of the workload in HR with the number of new recruitments that were approved in the 2018 budget, we had to prioritize hiring, and this person actually didn't get hired at all until August of this past year. So in effect, because I had half of a year's budget basically to dedicate to the position, I was able to employ that person full-time for the second half of 2018. By the time this person was hired, my supplemental request had gone to the board for the incremental hours for 2019. So in effect, this person has been working 35 hours a week since they were hired. It's just their status was part-time to start, and effective January 1st, it becomes full-time. The $60,000, I just pulled that out of my head, I apologize. It's because the allocation request and what's reflected in my budget report was based on that increment of 0.5 FTE, as well as another full-time equivalent for the department. And that was how I was going to divide essentially 3.5 FTEs to support HR services was somewhat indeterminate at the time. So the total number was $136,000, of which a third, it was supposed to be divided into thirds. So in the end, what the senior management team decided was that 0.5 would go to making the safety and wellness advisor full-time, and 1 would go to a full-time recruitment consultant. And so that's what I proceeded with, and I just couldn't do the math in my head, but it's basically 1/3 of $136,000 is the actual incremental cost of creating a full-time position out of a half-time position. 47, 48.
Follow-up?
Which will, which will include wages as well as benefits overhead.
147,000 a year?
No,
47,000.
47.
47,000?
Yes.
Per year?
Yes. In
For-
addition to the previously approved from the prior year,
Okay.
another
okay.
half.
All
So
right, let's
it's
go for 2019 then. If he goes full-time,
Yes.
what's it going to cost?
incrementally or totally?
Totally, 1 year?
So it would be 94,000.
94, okay. And again, I'm trying to catch up here. In that particular industry, because it is becoming an industry.
Yes.
What's the requirements for the qualifications? Is there a university degree? Is it
Excuse me,
dedicated to that?
Director Wilson, that is not our
Okay.
job.
All right.
Yeah, thank you, though. I have one more of Director Acton, and then I would like to call the question. Dinner is simmering, I'm told.
Yes, I can't wait for dinner. My brain's not functioning well. So I had a question, and now made a note on Thursday, and I don't know what it means. But what I think, I just wanted to clarify. Maybe you could just clarify this for me. So the GIS budget has increased by 6.5%. It's almost $40,000. But then, and I'm looking at the financial considerations, then it says in number 3 that there's $111,000 in operating reserves for GIS. So these are actually, are they being funded out of different functions and we're just putting it all into one? I'm a little confused. And yeah, could we dip into those to cover some of that extra GIS budget?
So all of the 4 different groups that are part of Function 105 are all funded as part of Function 105. We do keep separate operating reserves for each of them because their expenses are essentially discrete, but you can't borrow from one for the other.
I wasn't even meaning to take from one from the other anyway, but what I was looking at is the added GIS budget of $39,000. So is that, a lot of that, a one-time cost that we could use some of our,
So all,
they've got 111,000 right now in reserves for GIS.
and all of that is for staff wages and benefits as well as increased allocations related to building costs. So all of it is ongoing.
So what does the building cost part mean? Is that a
so-
one-time renovation? Or?
No, so we allocate the cost of this building. And so, no.
So it's
that's-
not really-
GIS is only housed here, so it's just for this building.
It's not really something we can, so I'd like to call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Director Kuhn opposed, motion carries. So would like someone to, we don't have any unfinished business, I believe, although it feels like we do, but. Seconder to adjourn, all in favor? So I think we have dinner. Maybe we'll have our brains when we're done. Oh, I'm not.